Hello, I'm Dennis Hastert, Speaker of the House of Representatives. I'd like to welcome all of you to Washington, D.C. This week, you'll examine how public policy is crafted here in the nation's capital. You will meet legislators and reporters, lobbyists, and staff. You'll learn how to analyze an issue, assimilate and prioritize information, and present an argument. All of these skills are used every day here on Capitol Hill. As a former school government teacher and a member of Congress, I encourage you to actively participate in your democracy by voting and making your views known to your elected officials. Each of you has a voice, and exercising that voice makes our nation stronger. I hope you enjoy today's program.
Live from Capitol Hill, it's Capitol Deliberations.
Hi, I'm Brad Anderson. I'm CEO of Best Buy, and we've got a chance to have two of the young people who've already had last night and this morning a chance to lobby Congress. So I'd like Libby and Alex to introduce you each.
Hello, my name is Alex Wyckoff, and I'm from McAllen, Texas.
Hi, my name is Libby Warner, and I'm from Muncie, Indiana.
Now, what did you find? What were you most surprised about as you actually got a chance to talk to Congress people over the course of the last couple of days?
Well, I was just surprised on how the whole process, how it really works. I mean, you can read about it in books and exactly how it works, but it's kind of abstract to you. But when you're actually there and experiencing it, it's more real, and you understand it a lot better.
See it kind of a different. How about you?
Well, I guess we learned a lot about the process. We learned a lot about how to go out and do things. But really, when we got a chance to go out and see the city, I really felt like this is the realization of all these different things that we've learned about with the monuments, and you've seen them in books, but once you're there, it's so much more emotional because they're not just there just for the significance, but they're there for all these different events and so many lives that were lost for all these different things. And it was just really moving, I think, to be able to go and see that.
I would guess it was hard to do that. Was it? What did you find? Was it pretty scary?
Well, yeah, you're going from place to place. We had no rest going from place to place, just experiencing all these things and trying to keep it together and formulate it all. But it was definitely worth it.
No rest for the part.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm from a small town, and here we are running through the metro system, trying to get through and going to the Senate and to Congress, talking to these big players in our government, and they're taking the time out of their days to actually listen to what we have to say. And I mean, it was very invigorating to find out that people really care.
You know, and I think that in finding people really care, what indicated that to you?
Well, the way that they listened to us, the way that after even we had our interviews and such, they'd come up to us and talk to us about where are we from, what do we like to do, and they sincerely just seemed like they really cared.
Go ahead.
And you have to keep in mind that these are extremely busy people.
Yes.
Important, busy people, and they take the time out of their day for just a couple of kids to learn. I think that's great.
What are you going to tell your friends, your classmates when you get back?
That was awesome.
And to come out here, I think I've definitely learned that to take the opportunities that are presented to you. I know that like the internships here through the government and such, it's a way to really get involved and just learn and appreciate what all the government does and what all these people do. I think if really coming in and just trying it is how to learn to really appreciate and respect what it is.
Yeah. Now, your dad's a history teacher, right?
Yeah.
What are you going to tell him?
I met Brooks Robinson, and that I got to talk to a lot of different senators, and that he needs to come out here because he's never been to Washington, D.C., and he needs to come and really see how well D.C. has kept our history alive here. And
Alex, you're going to be an engineer.
Yes, sir.
What are you bringing back from this experience relevant to that?
Well, I'm actually bringing back a whole new perspective. Before, I was kind of skeptical about politics and policy, and I thought kind of dull, but now I can really see
it's not so dull, is it? All right, thank you very much. All right.
My name is Glenn Augustine. I'm the Associate Director of University Communications at Ball State University, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's program, which is a partnership between Ball State University, Best Buy, the Best Buy Children's Foundation, and we also want to thank the Office of Congressman Mike Pence. He's the 6th District Congressman from the state of Indiana, and his office has been instrumental in helping us put this program together. We're in the Rayburn building, which is right across the street, and you can actually go through an underground tunnel and walk across to the U.S. Capitol building here on Capitol Hill. Just a little bit of history for you. The building is named after Sam Rayburn. He was from Texas and served as Speaker of the House for 17 years. That's the longest time that anybody had ever served as Speaker of the House. I must say that his time as Speaker was broken up twice by Republican Speakers of the House. The person who served the longest consecutive time as Speaker of the House was Thomas P. Tip O'Neill from the state of Massachusetts. He served for 10 straight years. We are on Capitol Hill, but you can participate just as these students have participated over the past couple days. There are a couple of ways for you to do that. The first is by calling in on the toll-free telephone number, which is 866-279-8716. You can see that right across the bottom of the screen, 866-279-8716. You can also email your questions in. We will try to get to as many of those phone calls and emails as we possibly can. I also want to show you a few of our special guests who are in the studio audience today. So not only are you going to be able to participate out there, but we've got a studio audience that also has some students in it. And right here you're seeing students from Hereford High School. That's in Baltimore County here near Washington, D.C. And in a few more minutes, we'll show you some students who came in today from Muncie, Indiana. They are from Muncie Westview Elementary School, so we appreciate them being here today and getting into the chambers. We invite those students, if you have any questions for our panel or for our panel up here, to step up to the podium over there, and we'll get to those questions as well. We are on Capitol Hill, and it's a busy day. Because of that, that means that the members of our panel who are actually from the United States House of Representatives are out in a vote right now. We're hoping to get them back in here as soon as we possibly can, but luckily for you and for us, we have some great pinch hitters here today. Right behind me here is Congressman Ed Pease. Ed Pease was a congressman from Indiana for how many years, Ed? 4 years. He is no longer a member of Congress, but quite familiar with how this system works. And he is going to act as our chairman of this hearing until perhaps Congressman Mike Pence from Indiana can come back. So, Ed, if you would, please take it away, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. I apologize for my spring sinus condition, but with this mic up loud, I hope you'll be able to hear me. You could not get a more realistic experience about what's happening in Congress than what's happening right now, which is that during the course of a hearing, members of Congress are frequently called to the floor to vote, and you will see through the course of this meeting, members come and go. What that tells us is a number of things. First, that Alex was absolutely right, that there's no rest here. People run from place to place pretty rapidly. But secondly, that how well you're prepared for a hearing is critically important. Many times, the members that participate in these hearings only know what's presented from the written materials that you provide. Sometimes, if they're fortunate enough to be here during the hearing, they can hear some of the oral presentation as well. But your preparation, and I've seen your preparation, it's excellent, is exactly the way it should be done here for a hearing in Congress. And this is a good example of the reason why you might see one member here while the others run back and forth. Let me introduce my colleagues who are all from the Indiana legislature and who are out here for the program and who we pressed into service today when the House got called in to vote this afternoon. State Representatives Bob Boehning from Indianapolis, Greg Porter from Indianapolis, and State Senator David Ford. Is it Hartford City, Dave? Testing my memory from when I served in the Indiana General Assembly some years ago. The way congressional hearings work is that the chair makes an opening presentation, then refers to the panelists that are here for their remarks, then opens for questions from members of the committee. One of the things that you will observe is that things are very fluid here. I guess that's obvious by now. And one of the things that people who present to a committee need to be aware of is that members may not allow them to finish their presentation before they get interrupted because the schedule changes so quickly. Fortunately, we've seen our presenters already be able to roll with the punches, and we expect this group will be no different. First, doing a presentation and overview of the issue before us today is Joseph Garnery. Did I get that right, Joe? I asked you, and I
Pretty close, Mr.
close
Chairman.
enough. Who will give us an overview, and then we'll hear from our other panelists. Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today I will be discussing the issue of mad cow, otherwise known as bovine spongiform encephalopathy. It's a progressive neurological disorder caused by abnormal prions, a type of protein. While prions are present in all brains, BSE occurs when prions take on abnormal shapes, can no longer be destroyed by the body, and thus accumulate. These abnormal proteins kill brain cells and are also prevalent in other parts of the nervous system. Prions are different from bacteria because they are not contagious and are not curable. While the disease can occur in younger cows, it is most prevalent in cows aged 30 months or older. The disease is contracted when cows consume feed that contains a specified risk material, brain, spinal cord, etc., from other infected cows. Once contracted, the disease slowly eats holes in the cattle's brain. The typical symptom of an infected cow is stumbling. BSE also poses a threat to humans. If humans eat specified risk material from a cow that had BSE, they are susceptible to the human form of the disease, variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Like BSE, it is not contagious, but once contracted, is always fatal. The disease also eats holes in the human brain, and the victim eventually shows symptoms similar to Alzheimer's patients and dies a slow death. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy was first discovered in Great Britain in 1986. Until December of 2003, a case of BSE had never been discovered in the U.S. However, a cow in Washington state was recently found to be infected with BSE. The cow had been imported from Canada and is believed to have contracted the disease there. The human form of the disease has also not occurred in the U.S., except for a Floridian who had spent many years in the UK, where she is suspected of having contracted the disease. BSE poses a significant but preventable threat to the United States. The disease is easily preventable by not feeding animal protein to cattle and removing the specified risk materials from the direct consumer market. Both precautions have been implemented by the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, as firewalls to prevent a BSE outbreak. Other firewalls have included trade embargoes against BSE-infected countries and testing of suspected BSE-infected cows in the United States. The United States policy concerning BSE has followed a science-based path towards preventing possible threats in the United States beef market. In 1989, the United States banned all beef imports from the UK, and in 1990, it began a surveillance program of American cattle. At the same time, the United States Congress passed the Animal Health and Protection Act that gave broad legislative underpinning to the regulatory agencies involved in animal and consumer health, especially the United States Department of Agriculture and the Food and Drug Administration. In 1997, the USDA bans feeding of specified risk material to cattle. Cattle farmers are also required to keep detailed records of what they feed their cattle for 1 year. Since the first BSE case on American soil was confirmed in Washington, an animal identification system has been implemented, and the testing for BSE in cattle has been increased. Beginning in June of 2004, the number of cattle tested for BSE will jump from 20,000 to 400,000. As the result of the new surveillance program are analyzed, the USDA and FDA will respond with relevant, effective policy changes to ensure consumer health and confidence in the beef market.
Thank you, Joe. The way committee hearings are conducted is usually in one of two types. Those where we hear from panelists individually with questions to follow each panelist. The other is we hear from all of the panelists before we begin questioning any of the panelists. We're going to take the latter approach today, which is to hear from all of our panelists before we begin any of our questions. And first, we're going to hear from Elizabeth Warner. I think it's actually Libby. Well, it's Elizabeth, but goes by Libby, who will bring us the cattleman's perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you said, I will be testifying on behalf of the cattleman's perspective on bovine spongiform encephalopathy. We support the increased surveillance program established by the USDA to be implemented in June of 2004. This program will be sufficient, and more legislation is unnecessary. We believe as producers that we need to ensure confidence in our beef, not forgetting that we cattlemen are also consumers. We think that excess testing will give the public a false sense of security, since the current test cannot detect the presence of prions during the incubation period. The consumers trust the government and producers to supply safe beef. If excess testing were to be instituted, consumers may fear that BSE has contaminated the U.S. meat supply. Any 1% change in consumer confidence is equal to $350 million in or out of our industry, and the public fears the unknown and what they do not understand. We believe that educating the consumers that BSE is not an issue in the United States will raise consumer confidence, thereby enhancing the national economy and our industry. The risk of BSE entering the U.S. food supply is a minuscule risk because of the laws put into effect in 1997. This legislation prohibits the use of specified risk materials such as the brain, spinal cord, and distal ileum in the U.S. food supply and the U.S. supply of feed that is distributed to the cattle raised in this country. This diminishes the risk of spreading the disease throughout the population. Thus, further education about BSE will help consumers recognize the safety of U.S. beef. The cattlemen recommend this action. Additional funding for prion-based research centering on BSE and its variants. Further education of the public on BSE and the low risk to the U.S. beef supply, and finally support of the USDA's increased surveillance program. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Warner. Now presenting the perspective of restaurant owners is Adrienne Nothnagel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have received my full testimony, so I have highlighted some points, and I will go over those points. Since the BSE, first case of BSE in the United States, there was a slight drop in consumer confidence. And ensuring the safety of restaurant customers has never been a higher priority for the restaurant industry. Restaurant owners work directly with the White House, the USDA, and the FDA to secure these efforts. Restaurants are the ultimate consumer. From the McDonald's industry to the hot dog cart across the street, restaurants are the nation's highest employer, employing 1.7 million people. So any change in consumer confidence definitely affects this industry. The U.S. does more than what is expected when it comes to regulation. After the first case in I believe it was UK in 1986, we began with immediate response to that in 1989 by banning exports from them. The focus of the restaurant industry is transparency of information and using sound science to educate our consumers. There are already bans on the use of downer cow, which is a cow that is too sick to walk, to stand, or show signs of neurological damage. We've also banned the use of ruminants, feeding of cattle or sheep that may transmit BSE to other cattle. The USDA has issued a new surveillance program that is effective June 1st, and we helped push for that legislation, the restaurant industry did. there's been a restaurant-specific food security handbook that helps operators develop food security programs. Ultimately, 91% of Americans still remain confident in our beef supply, and the restaurant industry will continue to use sound science and continue to use or push for legislation that will continue that confidence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nothnagel. Representing the consumer perspective is Mr. Isaac Jackson. Mr. Jackson.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and other members of the Congressional Board, I believe you have already received the consumer's complete written copy of the testimony on BSE, so I, too, would like to highlight some points from that testimony. Mad cow disease, or should I say bovine spongiform encephalopathy, is a fatal disease that will kill anyone who is unfortunate enough to contract it. The disease, BSE, originates from a prion. Unfortunately, we do not know much about these prions. Every day, consumers are assured that the beef that they get from a four-star restaurant or the street corner vendor is safe from BSE. But how assured can these consumers be if there are so many mysteries about prions and the other diseases that originate from prions? The government needs to appropriate funds for prion research. There are 3 benefits that you will gain from funding prion research. It increases consumer confidence. It also reassures foreign trade partners. And this ultimately benefits every stakeholder in this issue. The second issue that consumers would like to bring up is mandatory animal identification. Consumers have the right to know where their beef comes from should it be infected with BSE, and this right should be given to them expediently. Money should not be an issue. Although it is expensive to do mandatory animal identification within the 48-hour time period, the ramifications and increase in consumer confidence will be more than enough to pay back the money that the cattlemen, ranchers, and meat packers use to do mandatory animal identification. There's also the issue of privacy. When doing mandatory animal identification, meat packers and cattle ranchers could be concerned that their privacy could get into the wrong hands. But the only case in which privacy is issued to the public is in the case that there is BSE. So basically, if the cattle ranchers and meat packers want to keep their affairs private, then they have to take the extra step to make sure that their beef is not affected. This is basically an economic incentive where they can self-regulate themselves on top of USDA regulation. The third issue that the consumers would like to bring up is transparency. In this case, transparency is defined as keeping the consumer informed, making sure that the consumer knows the dangers, the safeties, and the chances of getting BSE. If the consumers are more informed, they are less likely to act irrationally on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jackson. Presenting the position of the U.S. Department of Agriculture is Alex Wyckoff. Alex?
Mr. Chairman, I believe you have a copy of my testimony, and with your permission, I would like to summarize my testimony.
Thank you, Alex. That reminds me that I should advise all the panelists that your written remarks will be entered into the record, and we appreciate you providing them to us. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, the USDA feels it's essential that the public realizes that beef is safe. This BSE issue is not something where it is at in the United Kingdom, but it's at a much lower level. We're not trying to say that it's not an issue. The USDA feels it's important that people realize that it's just something that's very low risk right now. What we're really trying to protect is the health of the cattle, and therefore the cattle industry. Past policies have already been put in effect, as has been mentioned by my other members. In 1989, we took measures against BSE, keeping in mind that that is 15 years before the first case of BSE had even occurred in America. Currently, after that Washington cow, the USDA put in additional measures, including a ban of use of live but non-ambulatory cattle from entering the human food supply, a ban on use of organs from cattle older than 30 months in which infectious prions occur in the tonsils and small intestines of cattle of all ages for human food, restrictions on techniques to mechanically remove meat from bones, and meat from tested animals will not be certified as USDA inspected until test results are final. In addition, in June, the USDA plans to implement increased surveillance from 20,000 cows a year to 400,000 cows a year. And upon the release of the Harvard assessment, we can discover the appropriateness of these measures. what's really important right now is the trust in the government. We're working with all these industries to get the best policy out there, and consumer support is essential. The information is available out there with all the sources of media, and we're doing the best we can right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alex. And thanks you to all of our panelists for your presentations today. Before we begin questions by members of the committee, I understand that we have received some phone calls from other participants in today's hearing at remote locations. The first one we have is Adam from Georgia. Adam, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Please ask your question.
All right. Well, knowing that when the cows get or have BSC, the mad cow disease, abnormal proteins build up around the spinal cord and the bones and the retinas of the eyes. Does this pose a threat for other such, for like hot dogs and other such foods, since they are made up from parts around these areas? And could that cause humans to get CJD?
Did the members of the panel understand the question? Yeah, Adam, can you repeat your question for us?
All right. Well,
or summarize it.
That when the cows have mad cow disease, the proteins build up around the spinal cord, the bones, and the retinas of the eyes. And does this pose a threat for like hot dogs, since the hot dogs are made up of materials around those areas and might be harmful to humans?
Mr. Garnery?
I'll try to answer that question. As part of the policies that the USDA has implemented, we talked a little bit about banning the use of specified risk materials from the human and cattle feed markets. And as part of the ramifications of that, we remove all parts that could be considered infectious materials from entering those markets. And therefore, we believe that types of beef that are made with many different parts of the cow, like bologna or some of the other meats, will not be infected with any of the possibly infectious material because those are taken out of the market.
Thank you very much. Again, before we refer to the members of our committee, we have another telephone call inquiry. Nate from Indiana. Nate, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Please proceed.
Okay, my question is directed towards Adrian Nothnagel, and I'd like to know how mad cow disease and government regulations will affect the price of a hamburger at McDonald's or Burger King.
Ms. Nothnagel, I assume the caller knows you since he referred to you by a name different from the one we were given. But do you want to answer the question?
Well, I think I can try to answer that. I believe the government testing for each cow was $30 a cow, and this would only slightly increase the beef from the consumer by a couple of cents. But I'm not sure how much the USDA will change that, if they'll change it, or if the federal government will work with that through taxes, or if it'll be implemented through the purchase of beef.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We will now go to members of the committee for questions either that they have or that we've received through email and otherwise from other participants. And we'll begin with Representative Baining.
Thank you, Congressman Pease. I have a question from Jonathan. This was emailed to us, and his question is, does stem cell research play any part in preventing further cases of mad cow infection? I don't know if Mr. Garney would be the appropriate or Mr. Wyckoff in terms of answering that question.
I can try to answer that question. From the research that I've done, almost all of the research done about mad cow has been prion-based research, which is not necessarily involved with any sort of cell research, since prions are not cells, they're actually proteins. And at the current time, there have been no connections that I know of between stem cell research and prions.
Thank you. Further question, Mr. Chairman. I do know that, I guess Ms. Nothnagel was asked by AJ in terms of the price. Can you share with us, do you have any historical data from Japan? I believe Japan has a 100% testing plan program. What kind of test costs do they incur? And in their case, did they pass the cost on to consumers directly through the price of the beef, or was it passed on through taxation or the services provided by the government?
Well, I'm not really sure how that worked out. I didn't really research the price that I'm sure they increased the price of 100% testing, but I remember hearing that the 100% testing was the people not trusting the government. So I'm sure that the government handled those fundings to ensure the trust of their people, but I'm not really sure how those budgets were met.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Benning. Senator Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me thank the members of the committee for being here today and sharing with us and for being so well prepared. Mr. Jackson, I guess I would like to perhaps rephrase some of the points you made about 3 different areas and maybe phrase them in a little different way. You talked about consumer confidence, but I think that public safety really has to be our number one concern here. We certainly don't want to have anything in the food supply that is injurious to the public in this country, to the best of our ability to prevent that. Number 2, food prices certainly are a concern to the public, and we need to keep food affordable. And thirdly, the impact on agriculture as an industry, which is something that really affects my district because we have a lot of agricultural production there, and we want to make sure that that stays profitable so that we can continue that industry here. In that regard, there's a question that came in that's similar to one that I wanted to pose to you or the other members of the committee, and it comes from Ansley, and the question is basically this: in terms of the liability of the people who are involved in the food chain, whether that's the restaurant owners or the cattlemen or the government for that matter, could you address anything that we can do with regard to who's responsible if someone gets sick?
Well, in answer to that question by Ansley, when you're talking about liability, if the mandatory animal identification process was implemented, liability would most likely go back to the farm where the cow originated or where the cow first got BSE. I believe that that's where responsibility lies. And into your remarks earlier about consumer confidence and public safety, of course public safety is in the best priority of the consumer, but we've already been assured that the BSE problem is not even a problem, it's just an issue, and the public really is in no danger of contracting this disease. But the problem is consumers do not know this, and their confidence in their beef is in jeopardy. So in talking about the agriculture and that business, the consumers are safe, but if they don't know they're safe, then their confidence could drop and therefore cost the business money. That's why I use the term consumer confidence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And before we go to Representative Porter, we have another telephone inquiry from Georgia. Michael, do you have a question for the panel?
Yeah, I do. And my question is for Mr. Jackson. Okay. Should the consumers of America be encouraged to eat a vegetarian diet until mad cow disease is under control?
Well, actually, I think if you're to encourage someone to go on a vegetarian diet because of BSE would be acting irrationally. It's not a huge problem in the U.S., and it's not something that you have a very likely chance of contracting. If there are other reasons why you should go on a vegetarian diet, well, that's up to you to decide whether you want to be more healthy or not. But in the case of BSE, there really is no reason for you to be afraid of the beef that you're eating.
Ms. Warner?
In response to that as well, it is more likely that a person will be struck by lightning than contract CJD. And I mean, I do know one person by, another friend who was hit by a lightning bolt, but how incredibly common is that? Not very. So personally, I believe that just deciding, because there's been a lot of media coverage of mad cow disease, or BSE, like we like to call it in the industry, that you should not drastically change your lifestyle. If enough people drastically change their lifestyles, then that would drastically hurt our industry. And hurting our industry, which employs so many people, that would hurt the economy and just backlash once again. You cannot think of something that's been blown up and, you just have to make yourself informed on what's going on. Now, if you do decide that for your own best interest that you do not want to eat beef anymore, that is your personal decision. Yeah, I would not encourage anyone to, just through the media coverage of BSE and the coverage of what's happened in the United States, because only one case from a Canadian cow was found in the United States, to change their lifestyle. Our system worked. We found the cow, and even with the testing, that was 20,000 cows at the time. So now that the USDA is increasing testing, we're going to continue to find anything if there is anything. Our system works.
Thank you, Ms. Warner and Mr. Jackson. And now, Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Mary out of Phoenix High School in Georgia. The question is, what sort of behaviors would a human infected with mad cow disease demonstrate? And I think that would go to Joe.
Actually, I think I might hand this one off to our USDA representative.
Thank you, Joe. The best way to think of BSE in terms of the human form is it's very similar to Alzheimer's. It happens later in the cow's life as Alzheimer's occur in later in human life, and that's the best way to relate it to human activity.
Also, there's an incubation period, a dormancy period that can last in humans 15 to 20 years, and you really won't have any symptoms until then. And once you get the symptoms of mad cow disease, clinically start displaying those symptoms, you usually die within 1 year.
And I would also like to add that if a human were to contract the Creutzfeldt-Jakob variant disease, which is the human disease of BSE, they might show symptoms, like Ari said, of Alzheimer's, similar to Alzheimer's disease, and perhaps some sort of dementia.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your responses. We have another telephone call, this time from Robert. Robert, I don't know where you're from, but we're glad you're with us.
Thank you. I had a question that I would like to pose to the gentleman from the Cattlemen's Association. And I would like to know if it is possible to irradiate, exposed to UV and or gamma rays, the meat as a possible cure to kill the infection, supposing, of course, that the infection is viral in nature. If so, has it been attempted? Why or why not?
Would you like to respond to that question?
Thanks, Robert. Actually, there have been different attempts to eradicate the prions. There's been research in it, though we do still need more. There is an association based in Indianapolis, Indiana, that has been working with that. They can take cows' bodies and take them through a process where pretty much they're treating them with a lye kind of a substance, and it turns them to bone. It'll eradicate all of the prion, and it's the only known thing thus far that gets rid of prions. Unfortunately, all you have left is a dust product, no meat. So yes, we have found a way to get rid of prions, but no, we have not found a way to do that and still save the meat through radiation or any kind of treatment like that. But it is possible to get rid of the prions.
I would like to also mention that the best way to think of BSE is not in a viral or bacterial sense. It's not an agent which flows through the bloodstream and absorbs into the system. It's an accumulation of these prions. So it's not as simple as taking a blood test to see if BSE is present.
Okay, thank you very much. We want to thank everybody out there for your calls and your emails. We're getting a lot of good questions. We want those to continue as we move through our congressional hearing today. I want to remind you of that phone number. It's 866-279-8716. Also online, we have a poll, and our first poll question is, with whom do you most align after hearing the testimony of our panel of experts today? So go online and vote. We'll try to get to those poll results just a little later. Now, these students have been out in Washington, D.C. for nearly a week now learning the legislative process. And part of that legislative process is actually lobbying members of Congress. But they had to have a lesson in lobbying before they could go meet 2 U.S. senators. And they got that lesson the other night from the National Retail Federation. Let's take a look.
Put the first issue, the most important stuff, at the front end of your argument. Because they're going to remember 2 things from a 15-minute meeting. What's the first thing you said? What's the last thing you said? It's
I think it's always good to know not only if they're Republican or Democrat, but how liberal or how conservative they are. Quite often, depending on the issue, that'll be important. There is no such thing as not arriving on time. Even if you're stuck in the metro doors, you do not. It's not acceptable. It's a no-no. It's just an absolute no-no.
We would be in favor of the mandatory animal identification program, right?
Right, and tracing back, like the 48-hour tracing program.
We've got the research that there are multiple theories about BSE and what the origins of it are and what actually causes it.
Losing a bunch of cows can be catastrophic to a family, especially a small farm family.
What about something with fear? Like what would you do if 80% of your constituents were unemployed?
Exactly.
So tell me what brings everyone here today.
The one thing about North Dakota that is very unique to them is that they are a family business, and as being a family, as Ryan is a farmer himself with cattle, so he's a cattle raiser, and that they document all their meat to ensure the safety to the public in North Dakota.
I think it's just informing the consumer of where their meat's coming from. You know, as Lewis mentioned, because North Dakota is family-owned farms, they keep records of the food that they feed their cattle and where it comes from. They know that, they know the origin of it, and they choose which feed they give their cattle.
We formulated our main concern to be the prion and what is causing this disease as a consumer. We feel it's regulated pretty well. It's regulated in the U.S. pretty well, but we need more research about this disease so we can maybe prevent it further.
North Dakota State is a public land grant university, and I know they do a lot of research with mad cow, and it would be possible if more research was done.
Public policy in action. As we promised you earlier, members of the House were out and busy today, so our scheduled chairman is back. That's Congressman Mike Pence, the 6th District Congressman from the state of Indiana. Congressman Pence and Chairman Pence for this hearing, welcome, and take it away.
Thank you, Glenn, and let me take this very brief moment to welcome the panel to this hearing and to literally welcome millions of young people across the United States to this electronic field trip. What you're witnessing here today is literally what goes on every day here on Capitol Hill. And that is, experts come before members of Congress, even in this very committee room, and present us with critical information on issues facing the nation. In this case, I'm a member of the House Agriculture Committee, and forums just like this took place on Capitol Hill regarding the so-called mad cow disease. And having participated in this morning's forum, I can tell you what you're seeing on the internet today is top quality presentations just like we hear each and every day. I do want to apologize as to why I'm late. One of the other realities of Capitol Hill, Glenn, is that we are called in the midst of busy schedules of hearings and committee markups of legislation to go to the floor to vote. And I'm just fresh back from the floor of the Capitol where we voted through 5 separate pieces of legislation. But let's get back down to work if we can. I'm going to go to a caller from Florida who is with us. And Amanda, this is Congressman Mike Pence. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Go right ahead with your question, Amanda.
Hi, I was just wanting to know, why did the ranchers start feeding the cows feed with protein, and why is it still made?
I would recognize from the panel Ms. Warner for an answer to that question.
The cattle industry began feeding cows ruminants from other, proteins. So in order to beef up, excuse the pun, the cows, it takes a while to get the cows to be as large as the consumers want them to be. If we feed with protein, then yes, the cuts of beef are much more tasty, much more what the consumer is asking for, and it gets them through more quickly. Yet, we have stopped that practice because of the chance of contracting BSE.
Thanks, Ms. Warner, although the chair would recognize that it is probably impossible to beef up a cow. Let's go to Georgia, and Tony is on the phone, live over the internet. Tony, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Question, this is Congressman Mike Pence.
How you doing today? My question is, in 1999, 31 cases were presented to the public by way of the internet, and then in 2000, the cases dramatically rose to 125 known cases. Is this number increasing or declining, and at what rate?
Who on the panel would be prepared to respond to that? Mr.
Garneri.
Garney. Delightful to have you here. You're a Hoosier, so you can respond to the question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure exactly what cases our caller is referring to. I believe he might be referring to human cases, perhaps, although I'm not sure. Either way, I know in the United States there's only been one confirmed case, and in Canada there have been very few. But if he's talking about Europe and or Japan, there have been many more cases of cattle and a few more human cases. The problem with knowing whether the number of cases are increasing or decreasing is that there is such a long incubation period. As I said, 10 to 15 years, up to 20 years in humans, and a few years in cows. So you have a problem knowing who's infected, when, and whether those numbers are increasing or not.
Thank you, Mr. Garneri. Glenn?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joining us once again is Brad Anderson, the CEO of the Best Buy Corporation. And Brad, I think you've been getting a little bit of an education today too, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been amazing. I've been getting an education from these young folks in terms of the amount of material that they have been able to assimilate in such an amazing period of time. But it's also great to see the kind of depth of the dialogue that's going on.
What do you think of the process they've been through now since last Friday?
Well, I'm a history buff, so I love people getting a chance to see what this is really like as we exchange information, because you can imagine how much information each of these Congress people have to get, and to be able, this kind of forum, and to have young people engaged in it, it's just terrific experience.
You've got three more students who are in what we call Group 1. Why don't you introduce them, and I think you have a couple questions for them.
Yeah, I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves, but we're going to start with Lindsay, because Lindsay, you're sitting in for Logan Ury. To give you an idea what this is like, Logan is right now with her congressperson. So Lindsay was asked at the last minute to step in. So you want to introduce yourself first?
Yes, I'm Lindsay Craig. I'm from Muskie, Indiana.
I'm Rylan Sunsbach from Biloxi, North Dakota.
And my name is Louis Johnson from Muskie High School in Indiana.
Now, all of these people got a chance to testify this morning. Who did you talk to?
We talked to Senator Conrad from North Dakota. Our group did. I believe this group was Senator Dorgan. Sorry, I didn't hear that. Yeah, we met with them in the morning. Our group met about 1:30, and it was just really, one of the things I enjoyed the most was the fact that I've been to Washington several times, and none of the times have I been able to meet with an actual senator, because compared to the House of Representatives, there are so many fewer senators, and so they're a lot more busy. And both groups were able to meet personally with the senators, and I found that we all, I think, found it to be a great honor that they took time out of their schedule so that we could meet with them.
Now, Rylan, one of the senators you met with was your senator, right?
Yes, actually both senators that we met with were from North Dakota. So
that can't count. Okay. So what did you think?
It was good to meet the people that represent us. As constituents, I think it's good that we all meet them and know them on a personal basis.
Were you surprised at what at the conversation you had with them?
Yeah, I was very surprised. They're very personable. They're very one-on-one, and they really care about what we believe.
Terrific. Now, Louis, what about what was it like to prepare for the chance to testify?
Well, the preparation for us that we had to do was like on the internet and all different types of things. But it was not hard. But we had so many sources that we got from. I mean, we got sources from the Cattlemen's Association, the Restaurant Association, the CSPI, the consumers, and also from the USDA. So we had gathered information all week from internet sources and also people in different organizations. So it kind of made it easier for us to actually spit out the information once we saw it.
I don't think you spit it out. But what did they stump you?
No, I don't think so.
Oh,
I don't think so. See, they knew that we don't do this for a living. We're obviously all learning about this process and still trying to develop it. So they didn't ask us any questions that would make us be like, oh my gosh, I don't know the answer. But they did make us ask us questions that made us think and kind of tested us to make sure we knew why we believed what we did and the reason we were portraying the view that we did.
What about if you were a congressman? What do you think? How valuable would this experience be?
I believe this experience would be very valuable because with these experiences you get to meet young people and you get to meet people from your state and their actual beliefs. So I believe it's very valuable to the senators themselves.
Terrific. What about you?
I just think that it's a great honor because many of the students around the nation don't get a chance to actually meet with their senator all the time like we did. And I just think that it shows the American community that you can meet with your senator if you really want to. So all you have to do is want to, and it's possible.
How about if you had to make a decision based on the testimony that you heard? Because there, as we're hearing this afternoon, there are some good arguments on both sides, right?
Yeah. I think I did the most research on the cattlemen, and I kind of feel the most for them because this is their livelihood and their industry. So I guess I would, and I'm sure Rylan, he's a cattle rancher himself in North Dakota. I'm sure that, I kind of agree with the cattleman view.
And you're actually going to be a veterinarian, right?
Yes, hopefully.
So how did you hear this?
I guess with all of this, I think it's very interesting because it's something that I'm kind of going into. So, being a vet, you have to diagnose this and you have to know it in and out. And so I believe this experience is very valuable.
Oh, thanks. Well, it's been a thrill to get a chance to meet all of these folks.
They've been a great representatives for the rest of the students across the country, and we're seeing that the students who have done the research out there in preparation have also done a very good job coming up with very good questions. So we can see the power of the field trip in not only what the students have done here, but what the students have done out there. So that's really a great testimony to this field trip and this program, and to kids getting out there and finding the information to ask pertinent questions. So it's been terrific. Well, as we mentioned, part of what the students were doing was a lobbying effort. They met with senators. The first group met with Senator Kent Conrad. He's from the great state of North Dakota, we should say. And here's a look at their visit with Senator Conrad.
Here to represent the cattlemen and the family farm. We want to protect the livelihood of the ranchers and farmers in not just North Dakota, but the whole United States. We support the USDA with their new surveillance program that they're going to implement in June, but we don't feel that no more legislation is needed. That the cattle industry is really self-regulating, and the cattlemen are not just cattlemen; they are also consumers. They do consume their own beef, so they feel the need for it to be safe also for them and their families.
We just feel that the self-regulation that's already been put in place is sufficient.
We want to do the most to make sure that our consumers know that we are trying the best for their safety.
And I think largely what you're saying I agree with. That is, we've done a lot to protect consumers in this country, and in part because our producers are themselves consumers. With that said, we know that there is a tremendous risk to this country if mad cow ever came here. Self-regulation, when you use that term, that troubles me, because I would not accept the notion that we just leave it up to the industry themselves to regulate, to protect the health of consumers. We've got a bigger responsibility than that. We've got an obligation as representatives of the government here to make certain that an industry is engaged in safe practices.
Any testing that the government proposes, we're going to support because we know how that looks to the consumer if we scare away from one of those things.
Absolutely.
So cooperation is our key, and we support everything that you've done for us so far.
I think those of us who have looked at what's happened in the United States know that much has already been done. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks for what you're doing.
We certainly want to thank Senator Kent Conrad from North Dakota for his time in allowing the students to lobby him on behalf of the cattlemen's perspective. We also want to go to our graphic now. We have our first poll question. We have some poll results. And our question was, a second question we had is, what's the best solution for mad cow disease? The problem is already effectively handled, seems to be running second to the beef industry can regulate itself. I think there might be some interesting opinions from our panel members about that one. Further government regulations seem to be running with the least amount of votes, and then the country of origin labeling is running in third. So right now it looks like the most persuasive arguments have been from the beef industry to this point. Again, I think our panelists might have some questions to follow up on that, but let's go to our next question. We have one of our students from Hereford High School here in Baltimore County who is going to ask her question.
I'm Virginia Callahan, and I just want to know, why should we spend money on additional testing when there isn't really a large threat from mad cow? There are other issues that could use the money.
I'll answer that, I think. The increase from the 20,000 to 400,000 cows as implemented by the USDA this June is in response to the finding of the first mad cow disease. And actually, this preliminary surveillance program is kind of an assessment program to find out the actual risk of mad cow and make sure that it's not a problem. And so the increase, as of now, is a temporary attempt to understand the problem, and that's why we feel we're spending resources on that to find a good way to make sure that the consumer is safe.
I would like to just add one thing. The increase in price is not something which the consumer should really be worried about. To put in perspective, if the United States were to do 100% testing of all cows, it would only cost 6 to 8 cents per pound extra to the consumer. So the jump from 20,000 cows a year to 400,000 is not something which the consumers are really going to feel.
Okay, we are getting more members of Congress are filtering their way back into the hearing room here. And so let's throw it back to Chairman Pence. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Glenn. And we're very anxious to get to the questions that are streaming in from across the country over the internet and the phone lines, but allow me to welcome a colleague and friend from the House Agriculture Committee. He is also a member of Congress from the state of Indiana, as I am, but he is a member of the other political party than mine, and a prominent, a deputy majority whip of the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives, the distinguished gentleman, Baron Hill. And the chair would recognize Mr. Hill for any remarks he would make to the young people across the country looking in to this experience on Capitol Hill.
Thank you, Congressman Pence. It's a pleasure to be with you here. It's a delight to see these young faces here in Washington, D.C. One of the disappointing aspects of this business is there's not enough young people involvement, and so it's really nice to see these young people have an interest in the legislative process, and I'm glad to be a part of it all. Now, Mr. Pence said that I was the opposite political party. I'm also the of the right political party, I might add, as well. But to tell you how kind of all this works, Congressman Pence and I are good friends. I respect him a great deal. We leave our partisanship here in Washington, D.C. when we come back to Indiana. We work well with one another, and it's a pleasure to call him my colleague. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today, and I look forward to your inquiries.
Thank you, Congressman Hill, and it is a delight, I know, to have you here. I think we have a telephone call from Florida, Glenn. Brent, this is Congressman Mike Pence in Washington. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead with your question, Brent.
My question is, I understand that there's no treatment for NVCJD, and I was wondering, is there any research in progress, and if so, and where?
Ms. Nothnagel, I believe the chair would recognize for the response.
Yes, there's no cure for this disease because this disease is from a protein. It's hard to explain. In the brain, there's proteins that make up your brain. The proteins are usual in a straight line kind of form, and this disease caused the proteins to cluster up. And because they cluster up, holes are formed in the brain. Now, what was the other part of the question?
Research.
The research. The restaurants, the National Restaurant Association has been pushing for more research on this prion, the protein, because so much is unknown about it. They're still researching it. And like the cattleman said, the only way to get rid of this is to destroy proteins. So there's no antibiotic, there's no cure for this, no vaccine, just because it's a protein, not a virus, and not a bacteria, which causes other diseases and other infections.
Thank you, Ms. Nothnagel. Excellent answer. And the chair would recognize Congressman Hill for an internet question coming to us from across the country.
From Brittany. If a pregnant cow were infected with BSE, how would it affect the fetus? Good question, right?
Mr. Wyckoff.
I'm not sure if anyone on our panel really knows the answer, but from what we know, since BSE is not something, as I mentioned before, or something that goes through the bloodstream as a chemical or something which is absorbed into the system, we can't really see it passing on to the fetus because there's no fluid or any way to pass it. It's not a contagious disease. It's an abnormality of the brain.
Thank you, Mr. Wyckoff. And as a point, Congressman Hill would no doubt attest when we're in hearings at the Agriculture Committee, it's perfectly appropriate for witnesses to testify that they don't know the answer. Let's go to the telephones if we can. And from Georgia, Charity is on the line. Charity, this is Congressman Mike Pence in Washington. Are you with us?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead with your question.
Okay, I was wondering, if a pregnant woman has BSE, is it possible to pass it to her unborn child? And if so, would you advise a vegetarian diet for pregnant women?
I think our USDA representative just kind of tried to answer the previous question about what would happen in a pregnant cow, and his response was pretty much, I don't know what would happen in a cow, and I'll kind of continue that into, I don't know what would happen in a woman.
Pleading ignorance, again, is perfectly acceptable before a hearing. I'm going to recognize my colleague and friend, former Congressman Ed Pease, for an internet question from two young ladies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These come from Tabitha and Tara, and they share this. Many consumers are confused on the topic of mad cow disease, and we're wondering what's being done to inform everyone that beef is still safe and also to inform people what BSE is. My guess is several of you could respond to this one, but which would like to try first?
Mr. Jackson, recognized.
As a consumer advocacy group, we agree that the consumer is not completely informed in the situation. The media has played an important role in what the average consumer knows about the situation. The media has gotten, if we could show you some headlines, if you read different media sources, you can become an informed consumer. And also, we advocate that the USDA possibly create a website, since internet is possibly a major source that our future holds, that possibly the USDA could create an internet source that could inform consumers that you could use that. But other than that, the media and other resources are a good way to become informed.
Mr. Jackson, the chair would follow up with a question about the recent manifestation of a Canadian animal made its way into this country. And many people feared that when that day would come, that beef prices would be seriously affected, that people would turn away from the consumption of beef. How do you or any other member of the panel account for the fact that in the wake of that revelation, the price of beef and beef consumption did not decline significantly? That's a success. Why was it a success?
I think that the fact that there was no major decline in the consumer consumption of beef, and that it's a success because when people were informed that perhaps after the first few days of the BSE scare, that the media, if they continue to read their newspapers and continue to watch their news stories, that they were assured that there wasn't a problem, that the beef was recalled. And when they saw the government recalling the meat, they saw that some action was being taken, and that also might have reinsured the consumer, and why they have not.
Interrupt, which the chairman can always do. You would suggest it was a combination of swift government action as well as good information in the media by consumer organizations and industry groups.
Yes.
Is that fair? Let me recognize my colleague, Congressman Barron Hill, also of Indiana, for any questions he may have of the panel.
I have a question for the panel concerning what you were just talking about. One of the things that I think occurred when the mad cow disease was first reported is the Secretary of Agriculture really did a good job of stepping up to the plate and assuring the public that the food chain was safe to eat. And I think she contributed a great deal to the success story in beef. How do you feel about the present Secretary of Agriculture? What are your thoughts about the job that she is doing these days?
They're doing a very good job. The agriculture, the whole committees, or the whole industries from agriculture are doing a very good job. In response to the consumers bouncing back, even after 9/11, consumers bounced back and had confidence in our government, and the confidence remained in our beef supply as well.
I would just like to reiterate that we think Secretary Veneman has done a good job and is continuing to do a good job with the proposed increase in regulation with the USDA regulations.
The Secretary Veneman and the USDA also, I'm kind of interjecting here, I believe have done a good job of having a working relationship with the media and complying fully with the Freedom of Information Act and other outlets so that the public can be informed if they wish to be.
Thank the panel for your responses. And Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we mentioned, the students not only went to see Senator Ken Conrad from North Dakota, our team of students who are here on our panel today also got to go out and do some lobbying. They met with Senator Byron Dorgan, also from North Dakota. So let's take a look at that videotape.
Representing the general consumer and the general consumer's concerns for assurance with BSE and Mad-Cal. We are wanting increased funding to support specific appropriations for prion-based research and the proposed implementing of the animal identification system. And we feel fully supportive of the regulations set by the USDA for testing.
Now, since the BSE scare back in December of 2003, the consumer confidence hasn't changed, but we would like to keep that consumer confidence high and maybe even raise it.
The country of origin labeling, we believe, is a way for consumers to feel secure and safe about the origins of their beef. The animal identification system, which has been talked about by the USDA and started to be implemented, will allow the tracking of any beef that may be tainted or come in contact with any sort of disease that could cause consumer concern.
We feel that the consumers could feel more assured with what's going on if there were more research and more understanding on what causes the protein to do what it does and how to stop it.
This is an area, I think, where the ranchers and the consumers have identical interests. Ranchers in my state understand that if consumers are concerned about the quality of the food, it hurts their industry badly. I've written in an appropriation, in an appropriations bill last year that is going to result in RFID tags, radio frequency identification tags, being implanted in 10,000 cattle in a collaboration between North Dakota State University and Dickinson State University. And we're going to begin a pilot project on animal identification. I believe in country of origin labeling. I feel very strongly it should happen. The grocery manufacturers and the big corporate interests do not. I feel that animal identification, country of origin labeling, and research all are necessary here. You've done your homework, and I think your recommendations are right on point, and I think they're not at all in odds with what the basic ranchers of this country would want.
Thank you again to Senator Byron Dorgan from North Dakota for visiting with our students. Let's go to a phone call right now. Celeste in California, you're on. What's your question?
At this time, potentially contaminated manure is being used as a fertilizer for the use of growing food for the consumer. Wouldn't this contaminate the food that's being consumed, and is there some kind of law in place to prevent this act?
Does anybody have a question about does anybody have an answer to the manure question?
I didn't hear
I think the caller Celeste asked whether or not the waste product from infected animals would infect food that humans may consume that grows in the field where manure is spread.
I believe
Mr.
there's. Oh, sorry, Mr. Chairman. I believe that research has been done to try to find out exactly how cross-contamination of prions occurs, and the most up-to-date research that I believe that I've seen still holds true to the fact that the only way that prions can spread is through specified risk materials ingesting from, one person ingesting those materials directly. There's no way to go from through multiple sources.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Garnery.
Okay, we want to turn the tables here a little bit. The students have been getting grilled. Now it's time for them to ask questions of the members of Congress and also former Congressman Ed Pease. Also out there, if you want to call in at 866-279-8716 and ask these members of Congress what they do in Washington, how their job is and how it works, and how your voice can be heard. The floor is open for that right now. Let's start with someone on the panel. A question for one of our distinguished gentlemen here on the dais.
I have a somewhat personal question. I was wondering if Mr. Pence is able to recognize every single member of Congress by name.
On the record, yes. Especially the more senior and influential members, I most certainly know by name. Actually, it's actually very difficult to do that. There are 435 members of Congress. I would compare it to a pretty average size high school that many people looking in today are attending. You know how it takes you a while to learn. I've been in Congress for 3 years. Congressman Hill has been in Congress, I think, for a little over 5 years. And I think it's just by the time you're a senior in high school, you know a lot of the folks that have been around. You don't know the freshmen. And that's an awful lot how it's like on Capitol Hill. Congressman Hill, your response?
Yeah, I would concur with what Congressman Pence has said. It's very difficult to get to know a lot of people. I served in the legislature back in Indiana for 8 years, and there were 100 members, and I knew each member very well. They were my friends, and I have some of my friends here with us this afternoon. It was also different in the way we legislated back in Indiana. We actually stayed on the House floor and passed bills, debated them on the House floor. Here it's not done that way. Usually we go back to our offices and meet with constituents and different interest groups as the debate is occurring on the floor. And then when it's time for a vote, we're called by a buzzer system that they have here, and we go down to the floor and vote. So there's not a whole lot of interaction among members, making it more difficult to become friends with members of Congress. So there's two things. There's a lot more people here, and the interaction is more difficult.
I also have another question for Chairman Pence and Congressman Hill. I'm aware that you two are both congressmen from Indiana. How exactly do you work together?
I'll let you lead on that.
Okay. We put our gloves on first and beat each other up. Get that all over with. Congressman Pence and I both represent the city of Columbus, Indiana. And there is a lot of business activity in Columbus, Indiana. Cummins Engine Company, for example, is a very important economic engine in the region, not just Columbus, but the entire region. Seymour, North Vernon, north to Shelbyville, and to Franklin. And so it's important for us to work with the business leaders in the region, so to speak. And a lot of research dollars are available here in Washington, D.C. to try to clean our environment up, that sort of thing. And Congressman Pence and I work very closely on trying to make sure that Indiana gets its fair share of tax dollars back to Indiana.
Congressman Hill has been a leader on that issue, particularly, Mr. Jackson, in highway funding. And that's a wonderful example of how we've come together and worked together. But I would also say that, and this is especially true on the Agriculture Committee, which was the subject of our mock hearing, that I don't know about you, Baron, but a lot of times the Agriculture Committee is less divided between Republicans and Democrats as it is between soybeans and fruit. And there's a saying that politics makes for strange bedfellows, and at the end of the day, though one is a Republican and another is a Democrat, we both represent the same part of the country and many of the same interests, and every chance we get to work together, we do.
I would like to ask a question that is actually directed to all of our distinguished panelists. I know that this broadcast is going out to all different students throughout the country, and through voting, we can all get our voices heard. But I know I've heard of the PAGE system and interns and things like that here in Washington or even at the state level. How would you encourage students to get involved with government so that way they maintain that involvement throughout their life?
Let me see if I can get former Congressman Ed Pease to respond to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are lots of ways, and surprisingly, I think the most obvious is the easiest, and that is to volunteer. Many times, the simple act of saying, I'd like to help, is more than enough to get yourself involved. That's how I got involved in politics. I volunteered in somebody else's campaign. To be quite honest with you, I didn't know a lot about his politics. I just knew I respected him. And I volunteered in his campaign, and next thing you know, I'm in the state legislature too. But there are structured ways. You mentioned several. There is a PAGE program, which is a residential high school here for young people that serve the House of Representatives and the Senate. There are internship programs that tend to be for college students rather than high school age students. Volunteering in your community is a hugely significant way to get involved in public policy issues. Just as several of you have represented volunteer associations, professional associations, and others, each of them has a grassroots organization where there are local groups of cattlemen and local group from the Consumers Federation and others who are also looking for volunteers to help out. And simply being a volunteer and saying, I have an interest in helping, I think you'd be amazed at how easy it is to get involved.
Congressman Hill?
It is easy to get involved in politics. People like myself and Congressman Pence and former Congressman Pease are always looking for good young people. As a matter of fact, in my congressional office here in Washington, D.C., I don't have anybody over 30 years of age. They're all very hardworking and smart, and I've always taken the philosophy that you hire smart people that are smarter than you because they can make you look smart, and it's worked for me very well. But democracy cannot work without participation. If you look around the world, you see a lot of bloodshed, and it's because people try to settle their differences with violence. We don't do it that way here in America. We do it through the ballot box and the legislative process. And it's not pretty sometimes, but it's better than the alternative. I think it was Winston Churchill who said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. And that's true. But it does require participation, and it's easy to participate. You just have to volunteer. We'll put you to work.
Glenn?
Thank you, Congressman Pence. After the students met with Senators Kent Conrad and Byron Dorgan from North Dakota, we asked the senators what they thought of their experience meeting with the students. Let's have a listen.
Well, I think it's a great idea. I mean, this is a kind of a breakthrough concept. I've never seen anybody do this before, and I really want to encourage it because I think the more people know about our process, the more respect there will be for it, and that's important to our country.
The ability to educate these kids to come in, talk about an issue with a member of the House or the Senate, I think will turn them into wonderful, active citizens in this country, and Lord knows we need more people active in this political process.
This is exactly what you'd like to see happen in the country. People take an interest and take the time to actually research an issue so that they can make a presentation. That's great training. And even if you're not in public service in the future, that's great training for whatever you do in life.
You've got to have an issue that you know, you have passion about it, and then go push that view and say, here's why it's important. It's important to me, it's important to the country, here's what I want you to do.
I think to have young members of these communities go out and give both sides of the case to their members of Congress is just an excellent idea, and I wanted to encourage it.
Right now is very topical. This issue of mad cow disease, how it affects our food supply, what we do to prevent the spread of BSE. It's a very important, immediate subject.
One summer, I lived right on the corner of this block. I was an intern in an office for a member of Congress from North Dakota. And it was a great learning experience for me, and it really got me involved. And I'm hopeful that maybe some of these young people will stay involved after having a chance to have this experience.
Well, we again thank Senators Kent Conrad and Byron Dorgan from North Dakota for their time. We are going to kind of turn the tables one more time. We're going to let the members of our panel ask the students about their experiences. So once again, I turn over the floor to the distinguished gentleman from Indiana, Chairman Pence.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you all for doing this. I can't imagine how scary this would be to come here and sit in front of millions of your peers around the country and a bunch of gray-haired congressmen. But you've all done a wonderful, wonderful job. I would just ask on a personal level, what's been your favorite part of your visit to Washington, D.C.? Anyone?
I'll start. I believe that my favorite part of this trip has been in meeting with all of the different groups and the different congressmen and kind of trying to read between the lines of what everyone says. And it's very interesting on how delicate some things are in Washington, especially the politics and the upcoming election year and that sort of thing. And it's just very interesting to me to see how people broach those subjects.
Anyone else?
Well, I'd have to say that, not that the rest of you aren't inspiring as well, but it was rather inspiring to meet congressmen who had joined when they were 22, or now they're like 29 and such. Mr. Putnam, Congressman Putnam from Florida, we met and he was on the panel, and it just inspired me to see that you really can get involved so young and stay involved and just keep doing these kinds of things and helping the government. So I thought it was really interesting that people did that.
I'm going to yield to Congressman Hill for a question to the panel, but just so you know, Ms. Warner, I actually ran for Congress the first time when I was 29, so your future is right around the corner. Congressman Hill.
I'd make a point of order here before I ask a question. Mr. Guarney, your observations about reading between the lines really qualifies you to run for office someday.
That's right. That's right.
But as a follow-up to that, I would ask, are all of you interested in getting into elective office someday?
That's a great question.
Well, I guess I'll start. I had never even considered politics as something that I would go into. I looked at it as so dull and so boring. And when you get into it, you realize that there's so many people passionate about what they do. And as part of the program, we had to all come together in a short amount of time, get our goals and accomplish those goals. And accomplishing those goals, you feel so rewarded. So I'm planning on going into international studies. And through international studies, you need this experience. So I don't know if I'll go into political science, but I know it's definitely going to help.
Anybody else?
My idea of getting a kind of government position would be an appointed one. That's what I would like to do. So,
are you asking?
If you got any offerings open, I'd probably take them. But
there's a lot more of those available.
Yeah, I think that the government offers a lot of opportunities, and if I could take advantage of them at some point in my life, I would really like to do that. But I'm not sure about the whole getting elected thing. That's long.
Very good.
Okay, we have a phone call question from Robert in Georgia. Robert, go ahead. An email question. Why don't you get to that one?
I do. It's from Pauline and Brittany, and I believe it's directed towards the congressman up on the panel here. How does working in the government affect your relationships with friends and family?
Well, it's something that Congressman Hill and I have talked a great deal about. He is a devoted husband and father, as I am. And the reality is that public life can be very challenging to the families of the men and women who serve at every level. For me in my house, we set Sundays aside as a family day. We're very careful about making sure that not too many days go by that we haven't sat down over the table for dinner. And, my family is such an intimate part of my service to the people of Indiana. I scarcely think I could do it long if I didn't create those barriers and protect that time. Barron?
I would agree entirely. I've been married for 31 years to Betty, and I have 3 daughters, and they mean the world to me. And Betty is a school teacher back in Indiana. So we're separated while I'm working out here. And quite frankly, and she was too, a little bit concerned about the living apart. But the key to it all is communication. Betty is the first person I talk to in the morning. I catch her on her lunch hour when she comes home from teaching. And then she's the last person I talk to before I go to sleep. Technology has helped as well. Emails with my daughters and my wife are on an ongoing basis. And in some ways, you can communicate better in this kind of environment than you were if you were back home.
Thank you very much. Let's take one last look at our poll that we've been running here and see what the online survey is saying right now. We asked, with whom do you most align after hearing the statements of our students? So this poll pretty much bears out what we heard earlier. It's to some degree, the consumer perspective is actually the one most of the students are agreeing with. The agency perspective of the USDA came in 4th here. Restaurant owners' perspective was in 3rd, and the cattleman's perspective came in 2nd place. So the consumer's perspective won out here today. Isaac, you have a little smile on your face over there. Why don't you tell us how you're feeling and I don't know if High Tech High jammed the poll to vote for you, but how do you feel that your perspective won out here?
Well, I feel that all of us did a great job, but when you're asking which perspective do you most agree with, most of the people that are voting are consumers. So if they're voting to see which one they most agree with, perhaps it's their own. So maybe I just got lucky that I was the consumers. Or maybe I do have a lot of friends back home.
All right. Well, I can say you've all done an impressive job. I've been very impressed with the work of the students this week. They've done a great job, and they have educated me on this topic. So I thank them very much. They made my job very easy. Let's get a couple of final comments, quick, about 20 seconds, Mr. Chairman, from you, Mr. Hill, and Mr. Pease.
Thank you for coming to Washington, D.C. I hope you leave here with the impression and the reality that this is your government, and I expect we're going to see a lot of you back here in the not-too-distant future. Barron?
I would ditto just what Congressman Pence has just said. I'm seeing some bright young people here. This is a great country that we live in. I was walking back from the Capitol to my office yesterday, and there was a bunch of protesters. I don't even know what they were protesting. And they were loud and boisterous, but they had an issue that they want people to know about. Only in America would this happen, and it's our right to do it. And your participation is also helping us make democracy work.
Congressman Pease?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I want to thank you also, but for a slightly different reason. Each of you has talked about how much you've gained by being here. Let me assure you, and I know without even discussing this with Barron and Mike, that we gain a lot from you being here as well. We try to get home back, when I was a member, and I know they do today, back to their districts as regularly as they can. But seeing folks from home, and particularly seeing young people out here, reminds us why we're here.
Well said. Glenn?
Well, we want to thank our partners in today's program. Those are Ball State University, Best Buy, the Best Buy Children's Foundation. We want to thank Senators Byron Dorgan and Kent Conrad from the state of North Dakota. Also today, we want to thank our pinch hitters. We have Bob Bainig, Greg Porter, and David Ford. These gentlemen are members of the Indiana legislature. Also our distinguished panel members, Barron Hill from Indiana, Chairman Mike Pence from Indiana, and Ed Pease, a former congressman from Indiana. Thank you very much for all your questions and emails and phone questions. This has been a great experience here on Capitol Hill, and that's it for Capitol Deliberations.